Jeremy, great to be back with you, my friend.
So happy to be here. Let's do it, Mike.
Let's jam, baby. We're going to talk today, just to set a container for the audience. We're going to talk today about introversion, not necessarily as a technical term, but I think you and I both identify as introverts. And I can speak for myself, at least for now. I always had some sort of shame around. I thought of myself as less than for being introverted, and I think it could be neat for us to explore why that is, and also what are the gifts of introversion, and what does it mean to me. So I'll tee it off by saying introversion is not shyness to me. I think they're separate things, and
hmm
I happen to be both. I happen to be shy, or at least historically, very much shy. I still think I am a little bit, and also introverted. Introversion to me is a preference to recharge alone rather than after a long day of work, let's say, and I'm feeling exhausted.
hmm
Would my way of blowing off steam be to go read a book quietly by myself, or would it be to go out and party with friends? And I think my obvious choice now is I'd rather to recharge and get my energy back. I'd rather go home and read a book or go on a long walk in solitude. Shyness to me is a fear of social rejection, maybe, or I think you can be very outgoing and extroverted and love being around people, but
hmm
also initially have the fear of what the encounter might be. And I am both of those things. So I'll pause for now because there's a
Yeah,
lot in there around why did I feel shame around either or both of those qualities. But what after I say that, what does it bubble up for you?
a lot. All right, here we go. So when you were talking about it, like you were talking about introversion, and I was like, yes, I'm also an introvert. Growing up with being an introvert and being around other people, I do think that you can miscredit it that there's like something wrong with me. And so I had a similar feeling because I was, you know, not always looking to go hang out with friends all the time and like would prefer to like, on a Saturday night, you know, healthy percent of the time, just like cook a meal and just, read a book and lay there after like a long week rather than blowing off the steam by going and partying and or drinking or whatnot. But the big thing that came up as you were like recounting your story was like this idea that so if shyness and introversion are different, it sounds like introversion for us is something that we kind of both know we are, and we like at this point are comfortable with our
Yeah,
introversion, and that we actually think there's a lot to that quality or way of being that can be advantageous both to us and the world. I think that. It sounds like you do too.
hmm,
Um, but with shyness, it sounds like this is a little bit of a different thing, and that this is something that there's potentially work to be done around because it is some sort of like deficiency. I don't know, I'm putting the bad label on this, but that
hmm.
the shyness results from some fear or something that's just like in the way, and that it is potentially not advantageous, and that there can be work to be done around it. I
Yeah,
don't know if that makes sense. I'm curious what that brings up for you.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess we're still getting into the technical I led off by saying this isn't an exploration of the technical, and yet
Yeah.
here we are. But yeah, I think you would be hard pressed to find someone who has done enough inner work and has a some sort of foundational understanding of psychology that it's not good or bad to be introverted or extroverted. They're
hmm
both qualities that have certain inherent strengths and certain inherent slippery slopes where it might not serve you in certain moments, which is another area that we could maybe explore. But
hmm
shyness, I'm sitting with it. I I don't make shyness a bad thing anymore in the way that societally I think we make it a really bad thing that
hmm
is almost it needs to be overcome or else there is a big deficiency. I think that in the way that I wouldn't say fear is a bad thing. the way
Mm,
that society makes it out to be a lot of times.
mhm,
And I think shyness is a form of fear. It's a fear of rejection. It's uh, I don't know, fear of stumbling on your words.
mhm,
There's a lot of different flavors it could take. And when I loosened the vice on myself about, I used to make it a terrible thing about me. I needed to pulverize myself to be less shy, and it led to me a lot of times, especially in college and the high school, I would drink a lot more to be more social and to get
mhm.
over my shyness, instead of sitting with what's happening here. What is this really about? And yeah, I think in a way, shyness probably, if we look back many generations, it was probably good to be very cautious about, am I going to approach
Mm,
this person or this animal or not, because it might kill me. So there's some really ancient wiring in our system that we it, I think societally we have outgrown that. I know that I'm not going to intellectually, I can very easily say the worst thing that happens if this girl that I like rejects me, if I approach her at a bar, is then she says I'm not interested.
mhm,
I'm not going to die. But my body is reacting like it's going to die. And that same thing has happened with me in public speaking. There are lots of things that in my life I wanted to do, but my body was really terrified of them. So with shyness, what instead of being really making it a terrible thing about myself and saying I need to obliterate this or just push through, having an empathy for myself and an understanding of why this is here has helped me work with it in a I have a better relationship with, oh, I understand why this is happening. It's not some sort of character defect for me.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's rooted biologically.
Yes,
Serves a purpose that you might have outgrown in certain circumstances, but still.
exactly. And our nervous system learns through if I feel on edge about giving a presentation or recording this conversation, and then I do it and I realize, oh, that wasn't so bad, I didn't die, then our nervous system adapts, and there's new goalposts that what used to be something that was unbearable for me because of how shy I was is not the case anymore, but there still are edges for us to explore, for me to explore. Like if I were to give a TED talk right now or something, that would be my nervous system would go, oh, that's too much.
Yeah.
But recording this conversation used to be something that I never
Mm,
would have been able to do. But now my nervous system has learned, you're good at this, Mike. So go for it. You're safe.
yeah, yeah, right. You can always push the boundary a little bit more. There's always like a next step, a next thing to potentially do.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, where my mind just went was like, what's the opposite of this? Is it like, you know, if this shyness is serving you in that way of telling you, oh, be cautious in approaching this, or be cautious when you do this thing. Maybe the opposite is just like, I don't know, rashness, or I don't know if that's the right word,
Reckless
or
is the
just like
word that comes up for
reckless,
me.
right, right, right. Um, and so the opposite is just like you have no filter on that
Hmm.
stuff, and you're like in overdrive in that way. So they're like both overdrives of like a different
Hmm.
thing, and then it's like kind of the virtuous mean thing,
Yeah.
maybe with like the Aristotle's language, or like middle
Yeah.
way. I don't know. There are those two like polarities
Hmm.
in there.
It is interesting. I wasn't thinking about it in that lens, but for sure, if someone is a scorched earth type of person who's telling it how it is all the time and has no filter, I mean that is certainly going to bite as well. Where shyness, sometimes the withhold or the unsaid could be, that comes at a cost, and so does saying too much and oversharing and over revealing. But I'm more interested, I think, in talking about introversion and
Yeah.
its gifts, but also then maybe its shadows. And putting shyness aside, I think that I had shame around introversion because as a kid, I always felt that the way to be most successful is to be really good at shaking hands and taking names, and to be
Hmm.
really confident talking to people all the time. And I think a lot of our school system is set up so that you're doing lots of group work, and those are beautiful things, but it's not, it's a pretty tough world in my estimation to be a thriving introvert in, or at least you have to work a lot harder to get your needs met than someone who is naturally extroverted, comfortable presenting in front of a large room, comfortable working a networking event and being around lots of people. That is energetically very taxing for me to be in a room that's full of people,
Hmm.
or out to dinner with friends when there's a TV on and lots of stimuli popping in my face. I have a hard time being there, really truly present in the moment, in a way that if I'm by myself or in an intimate conversation like we are in right now, I could really channel my energy and focus on this. Is there's not much else going on. So yeah, what is it sparking you?
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like this, like kind of the overstimulation is a big thing for you.
Big
It
time.
definitely, for me, one of some of the worst moments for my introversion are like these big events that are loud, and I'm in like these groups of lots of different people, or meeting very different people in like rapid succession who I
Hmm.
don't know already, and having to continuously relate to those new people, and feel like I can't escape the like torrent of the whole thing, and that I'm, constantly, I'm trying to think of the exact situations that this gets like
Yeah,
completely
man.
blown up in. But let's see. Yeah, I'm just imagining like a big room, a loud
Hmm.
room, where I actually, so something interesting is that I carry a lot less shame around now about standing by myself for a little while and
Yeah,
just watching people. Because I used to think that was like the worst thing ever.
Steven
And
Glansberg,
growing up,
right?
I was, say it again.
Steven Glansberg, the super bad reference. It's in
It
pop
doesn't hit.
culture. It's just
Yeah, it's so bad.
it's you're just like, if you're a loner, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting because actually, like now, I doing that, I perceive it as like an act of bravery a lot of the time. So I walked into this event a few weeks ago, and everyone was talking to one another. No one knew each other, and I just was like, okay, I can either like butt into one of these few conversations happening right around me, or I can just stand here for like a minute and just like observe the, the situation,
Yeah.
and if anyone new walks in, maybe they would just come talk to me or something. And I used to like in the moment of standing there be like, wow, I must look like such a like weird, like unsocial, like, no one wants to talk to the guy. But like that, I don't think that's at all what the right way to look at it was for me. And that it's more, now I see it as, if that's what I want in that moment, then I should just do that. Because if I want to talk to somebody, I will. If I don't, me going to talk to them is just going to result in this like stiff and horrible interaction anyway. And so I may as well just listen to that. Uh, yeah, I'm curious if that brings anything up for you.
Yeah, well, right before we hit record, you briefly mentioned Susan Cain's book,
Hmm.
Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And one of the lines that is very memorable from that book is, one authentic relationship is worth a fistful of
Mm,
business cards.
yes.
And so I have that belief is constantly running in the back of my mind at all times, because I think I have certainly been conditioned to believe that a fistful of business cards and lot accumulating lots of fill in the blank
Hmm.
is always the best thing. So lots of friends, lots of relationships,
Hmm.
lots of clients, lots of calls, having a full calendar is always the best thing. When for me, I know that because of the reflection that I've done on myself, I am at my best when I am in a smaller group or one on one, and networking. For I can create my own home court advantage in a lot of ways. I don't I'm not great at big networking events, so why don't I just do networking events that are more intimate and one to one? And now I've made a career out of it. Also, coaching is mostly a one to one,
Yeah.
deep connecting. I think a lot of coaches are introverts, and
Hmm.
there's a draw to that for that reason. And I think another big skill, I know you're a prolific writer, Jeremy, and I fancy myself to be a decent one and a good interviewer. Introverts, this not is not always the case, but are can very easily retreat into our own world and like to be alone with our thoughts and make we create our own worlds a lot of times, and we make good storytellers for that reason, good writers. And so I've had to get in touch with those parts of me that I didn't really for a long time, the creative parts of me, the parts that relished in doing things by myself. I used to really think there was something less than about that, or
Hmm.
that I needed to eradicate myself of it, instead of saying, this is just a part of who I am. Like, let's leverage the gifts here.
Yeah. Yeah. The intimate relationships and the one-on-one coaching is a very interesting string to pull. I don't know if the majority of coaches are introverts. I just don't know. I
Mm.
would guess it could be true. What I remember most from Susan's book, though, which was like a decade ago, I don't know when it was written, but whenever I had it, which was 8 years ago, 10 years ago, was that for leaders especially, there are big benefits to being introvert.
Yes.
I'm in no way saying that introvert's better than extrovert. It's just that kind of the misperception. What I remember in the book is that introverts like aren't good leaders or can't be good leaders, but that in reality, a lot of today's leaders are introverts, and that there's something maybe for you, your creativity that is sparked, or that kind of goes hand in hand with your introversion because you find that creativity in solitude. um for leaders, it's the decision making and whatnot that they find in solitude, and the ability to actually contemplate things deeply rather than always be talking in a room with other people about those things. Like, this isn't to say that it's an either or thing either
For sure.
for introversion, extroversion. A lot of people, at least from what I see, again, this is not, we're not getting into the technicalities of this, but like people can play in both arenas
Hmm.
and fall somewhere more in the middle of the spectrum, where they can play the like big networking game for like a whole day, but then they're like, oh, I just need like an hour to myself the next day. So like, whereas for us, maybe it's a little bit more on the introversion side, which is like
For
the
sure.
networking thing is like it's a 2 hour thing and then we need to recharge. So there are like many different flavors of it and degrees of it. Are we getting to something like, I just talked my way into like thinking about solitude and leadership? I don't know if you've
Hmm.
read the essay.
I haven't, but there's definitely something to be said about the an introvert is more likely to take the space to give themselves room to be the visionary who is creating a bit. It's hard to create something big without giving yourself space for the deep work, like Cal
Mm,
Newport would say, or to dream up what is the real vision, where are we going here, in a way that someone who's in action all the time and constantly doing things and being around people, that it's harder to generate the space to think about where are we taking, where is this company going, where is this relationship going, where's my life going. There's
mm,
so many ways that reflecting is a really beautiful thing. And I also wrote down as you were talking, there's
mm,
other, it's become very
mm,
mainstream, but I think for most of my life I'd never associated being a good listener with
mm,
being a leader. And not being able to observe and listen are such important leadership skills, right? To be
mm,
able to size up what's
yeah.
happening in the room. It's harder if you're talking all the time. You can't pay attention to what's the flavor, or what's the energy of the room, what's happening with, how are my employees responding to this new thing that we implemented in the office. So there are lots of great leadership qualities for sure that
Mm,
come out of introversion. And it's also I also want to debunk the myth that being an introvert means that you're bad with people. I think you and
Mm,
I are both actually very excellent with people. It just has to be in the right setting ideally. Otherwise, we might need to be more mindful of, like, for example, a lot of times at a wedding or at a big social gathering, I will need to go to the bathroom or just get fresh air
mm.
for no other reason other than it's been too long that I've been in a room full of people, and I just feel like I'm getting drained.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. A lot of different things came up there. I agree with you totally that it has nothing to do with being good or bad with people. I would say they're probably like very independent variables. In fact, if it skews in one, I don't. If it did, if better with people was an introvert or extrovert thing, I don't even know. I couldn't make a bet which one it would be. It
Right.
could be either. Introverts could be better with people, whatever that means for measuring it by
I don't
like.
think people believe that culturally though.
People don't believe it culturally. Here's an interesting thing I'll throw in. From that solitude and leadership
Yeah.
piece, one of the things so it's this guy Alex, I think his name is Alex something, who wrote it was actually it was a speech at West Point, and he talks about how the essence of leadership is solitude, and what he means by solitude is the ability to think for yourself and
Mm,
to take time to actually figure out like what you believe rather than just taking the cacophony of noises and say that that's what you think. But then at some point in there he talks about how one form of solitude is deep conversation with another person,
mm,
which is so interesting because I think we were just getting to that, in our own way, which is, maybe our coaching or just the way that we construct our lives with what it sounds like is very similar, lots of or a handful of very meaningful relationships, but a lot less of the like business card type relationships. And that even in those relationships, we're finding a form of solitude that is recharging us.
yes. Yeah. That resonates a lot with me. I would also love to hear you expand a little bit more if there's anything more there, because I'm definitely enthralled by this idea of leadership and solitude, but I'm not too familiar. All I can say on my end is
Yeah.
it sparks something in me. It's resonating. But what
Yeah.
else did you from reading that? What else did you learn?
Yeah. Oh, so much. One of the best leadership pieces I've ever read. I don't read like a ton of pieces like it, but it was just so meaningful. Uh, the main point of the piece is that if you don't take time to figure out who you are and what you want, what you believe, then when the chips are down and the money's on the line or whatever, you're still not going to know,
Mhm.
and you're not going to be able to figure it out then. And so in order to lead other people or yourself for that matter, you need to be able to spend time alone and figure these things out and have a unique way of approaching the world. Not that not maybe unique's not the key. It has to be something that you came up with that is your own authentically, or it's not a fit,
Yeah.
or you just lifted it from somewhere else, or someone told you to do it. And that a part of his piece is that like, a lot of people will follow these traditional paths of, go to investment banking or law or consulting. I was part of that path. You're a part of the path as well.
Sure.
Or like we have pieces of that path still in our own journeys, but that if you just follow sort of what other people want from you or the rules, then you don't really take the time to figure out what vision you actually want to create and
Mhm.
who you want to be. And without that, there's no leadership. And
Mhm.
so to be a leader, you need to be capable and willing to do that type of work. And so I think maybe what I'm coming back to here is like I work with a handful of leaders in my coaching, and I'm pretty sure that you do as well, whether they call themselves that or not. I don't know how
Sure.
you describe them, but that's a big part of the work that we do with clients, I think, is giving them that space to help them figure out who they are as leaders and to be able to be an authentic leader that is them instead of, when the big moment comes to when they're at the operating table or when they're making the big decision or when they're, doing whatever, giving the big speech, they don't have to figure it out in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That resonates a lot. It's who am I can be a meditation in and of itself, a question to live into. And I would guess that, well, introspection to me actually doesn't have to demark introvert or extrovert. I think introspection is a very valuable quality for any person at all, whether or
Mm,
not you identify as a leader. But I would, without being with any attachment to being right here, I would guess that introverts are more likely to have introspection than extroverts and to
I mean, the
reflect.
root of the word is the same.
It's the same root of the word. They're more, I would guess we are more likely to be thinking about what matters to us, who are we, how do we want to show up. And I, in my experience, without living with some sort of intentionality, introspection leads to intentionality, and
Mm,
intentionality really leads in a lot of ways to fulfillment, living
yeah.
a rich and meaningful life, and not just one that is filled with nice things. I was also hearing in your answer that a lot of us, if we don't stop and ask those questions, we're living unconsciously.
Mm,
We're drifting through life with a script that was given to us that wasn't chosen by us. And to be a really effective leader, we need to stop and ask what's important to me, and to develop consciousness and to develop our own skills, our own
mm,
path. Which is not to say that we don't learn a lot from other
mm,
people, right? One of the easiest ways for me to forge my own path is to see what resonates with me about other people's paths. How can I make those my own? And so I don't know if we're getting a little off of like introversion here, but I think this is a really
yeah.
meaningful conversation to be having.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, I mean, I think we're still playing in the similar space of, the introversion like territory. It's a vast territory, I think. But yeah, what came up for me, like I heard a few words in there that I was writing down: intentionality, meaning, values, and that like a lot of these things are found through the introspective process, and
Yes.
that part of your in your like not being right assessment, like introverts are more likely to go through the introspective process, and then so possibly more likely to have at least considered or thought through those things for themselves. I think what came up for me there, which is really interesting, is like these introversion extroversion spectrum is sort of part of, it's like one whole, and that
Mhm.
they're like on each side of the spectrum there's some strength. So maybe the introverts are like more naturally geared towards like doing the visioning of the company, or like
Mhm.
the what else? Like like the important values of a company. I'm talking about business right now, leadership,
Yeah.
or like what the whole thing even means and like why they're doing it in the first place. But then like that same person sitting in a room like doing that work and then getting exhausted after 5 minutes of the networking event, it might not build the best company. And so like now it's like, okay, given that both sides of the spectrum, both sides of the spectrum have different strengths, how can they like come together to create something
Yeah,
that's
man.
bigger than like just what's on one side of it?
Yeah, I mean, one of my shadow qualities is that instead of just taking action, I'm always over analyzing and visioning what are all the different types of scenarios, and that can be an incredible strength. But going gone too far, it's that like we've got to just do something, right? We can't
Right.
just think about it all the time. And it's reminding me of another example from Susan Cain's book Quiet. FDR, former president, and Eleanor, in a lot of ways, were a partnership around. FDR was the extroverted, front of the room, naturally charismatic leader who is the face of the marriage and the relationship, but Eleanor was the more gentle, reflective. What's the vision we're moving towards here? And I don't know romantically how their relationship was, but they
Mm,
were extremely dynamic as a partnership
mm,
politically, because Eleanor was able to see big picture and help FDR really move out into the world with the vision. And I think that really the most effective people, companies,
yeah.
cultures are able to leverage all the different aspects of there's no two humans who are exactly the same. We all exist on some sort of spectrum. How can we take the gifts of every person?
Yeah.
And in this simple example, it's what's the best thing about extroversion? What's the best thing about introversion? How can we bring them together?
Yeah, yeah. So it's so fascinating. So it's like on the collective level, for whether it's like a couple or like a founding team or a company, like how do they play across the whole spectrum? But then like there's the individual level as well.
Hmm.
Like for you and I, we were talking, the conversation started about how we like live on one part of the spectrum, but like maybe we would be served in some way to be able to kind of flex across the whole thing and not just be kind of camping out in this one place. So it's
And
like
that
an
happens
individual.
sometimes. Like sometimes I relish so much in my alone time that I then realize, oh shit, I have a yearning for connection, man. I want to
Yeah.
be around people.
Yeah. No, yeah. I
So
mean, obviously, I think we might have not touched on that point is that we both like human and friends and, love and whatnot is like my whole life. Like without it, there is no life. So we're not in any way saying that it's not important to us. Like it's still the central part of my life is connection,
for
which is
sure,
such an interesting thing because the conversation was started as like we don't want to go into a room with 500 people, but humans are like the most meaningful thing, you know,
totally.
for us.
It's just about not over indexing too hard on it. We have a preference towards introversion. If we over index, then we feel truly alone. And as humans, of
Yeah.
course, we are biologically wired to be social. Whether or not wherever we exist on the spectrum, we want to feel like we are part of a collective that is much bigger than just the self. But I think one closing thought I might
Yeah.
have about this, because on one hand, yes, you don't want to over index and go too far all the way to like, I'm a hermit and I don't ever see people. But
Hmm.
I've heard Brene Brown say this, and it really resonates for me that oftentimes she feels most alone when she's in a room
Mm.
full of too many people, and she feels like she really belongs when she's alone with her thoughts. And I
Mm.
just want to leave that as a concept, a cliffhanger or something that'll help
Yeah.
folks to reflect a little bit, because that resonates a lot with me. In as much as if I'm in a conversation with a lot of people and I don't feel like I'm connecting, that's when I feel the most alone.
Mm. Yes. Amen to that. The For me, the antidote to that though is, as I kind of alluded to before, I think for me personally is the one-on-one
Totally.
type connection that I feel most at home.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Same
well,
here.
for anybody that listens to this, what is it for you that you find the most recharge in? Is it the group of 500 people at the big event? Is it one other person, two other people, no people, as Mike was saying? You know, good reflection, I think.
Yeah. Or does it depend, right? What are some of the indicators that you're yearning for more connection? What are some of the indicators that you're yearning for more solitude and alone time? Those are good questions to leave you, listener, with. And is there anything else here for you right now, Jeremy, before we close?
Feels good to me.
Great jamming with
You?
you. And no, I feel complete. I think we covered way more ground than I ever could have anticipated. And I look forward to the next one, my man.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Mike.